into everybody. These people, whoever they were, tied up, blindfolded and executed. We were passed this picture by a fleeing migrant on the border with Egypt. After he filmed it, he ran. Lawrence Lee, Al Jazeera.
Let's go to Nick Clark now in Washington for the latest U.S. reaction to events unfolding in Libya. Nick.
Yeah, Darren, thanks very much. All options remain on the table to help end the violence in Libya. Those were the comments of U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton just a short while ago. America's top diplomat saying her country's first priority was to protect its own citizens, but that other countries also had a role to play in pressuring Libya to halt the violence.
Right now, the situation is fluid. It is uncertain. It is difficult to get a clear understanding of everything that's happening everywhere throughout the country. So we are working very closely with partners. And there are many countries that have much closer relations with Libya than we do. In any situation, our foremost concern has to be for the safety and security of our own citizens.
Speak to Patty Culhane at the White House. Patty, again, this emphasis on the security and safety of citizens. And it makes you wonder if this rumour that's been going around that the US are just waiting for the safe evacuation of their citizens to be complete. And then the pressure might be ramped up a little.
You know, there were a lot of reporters that pushed the White House press secretary, Jay Carney, on that today, but he really was able to skillfully avoid that question, really saying that it isn't a question of the president's going to come out once the Americans are safe. But I can tell you, behind the scenes, administration officials, people in Washington were really telling reporters that the concern was about the Americans still in Libya. And you could see that the State Department was quite concerned about the embassy employees and also the Americans in Libya. That Sunday, Monday morning, they put out a travel warning, and it was more strongly worded than we usually see from the State Department, saying you need to get out of Libya and don't travel at night, and if you can't get out, then you should basically hunker down. So there was an obvious concern for the citizens there. Obviously, the concern is that Libya would realize that they had that pressure and take those Americans hostage. That is a situation the Obama administration said behind the scenes they were trying to avoid, but pushed on whether or not that was concerned publicly. They didn't bite on that today.
And Patty, that was the Secretary of State, but we now have a timing, apparently, for the President to speak at 22:15, in just over an hour's time, 22:15 GMT, that is, around about an hour from now. What might we expect there? Much the same sort of thing? He's not likely to change his tone from his Secretary of State, is it?
Well, actually, he could. And what the protocol says is if he's going to make a change in tone, if there's going to be a change in administration policy, it wouldn't come from the Secretary of State. That would be considered bad form. It would come from the President of the United States first and foremost. So we will be looking for tougher language when President Obama addresses this issue. This will be the first time he's spoken about Libya on camera. Now, the White House likes to say, when pushed on why did it take so long when so many people have been dying in the streets, why did you wait days, they like to refer back to a paper statement that the president put out on Friday. In that statement, he did call for restraint in Bahrain, in Yemen, and in Libya. Important to point out, I think, that the president actually has made phone calls to Bahrain, to Yemen. He has yet to publicly say he's done that when it comes to Libya. So this will be the first time we will actually be hearing from the president when it comes to Libya, and we do expect that he will take a much tougher tone.
All right, so the president likely to turn up the heat. Hillary Clinton, meanwhile, was putting the onus on the international community, which is fair enough, I guess, and saying that perhaps other countries have more influence than the United States as far as Libya is concerned.
And Libya has had and the U.S. have had a long and very hostile relationship, but they have reestablished diplomatic ties since President Bush was in office. 2003, they started basically talking again over weapons. 2006, embassies and full diplomatic relations in 2008. So they have had diplomatic relations for a couple of years. I think what Washington is referring to is, unlike in Egypt and Bahrain, they don't have a military presence there. They don't give a tremendous amount of aid to Libya, so they don't feel that they have that leverage. They don't have the personal relationships. They don't even have an ambassador in Libya. He was recalled after that WikiLeaks scandal broke and all those embarrassing remarks were made public about Colonel Gaddafi. So basically they're saying that the international community is going to have to take the lead on this. I want to point out, though, that critics are saying that maybe that the Obama administration is downplaying its influence as the world's remaining superpower, saying that you could establish a no-fly zone, you could freeze Gaddafi's assets, you could send the message to his generals that if the violence against peaceful protesters continues, that they will face war crimes trials. They could be making a bigger push at the United Nations. We'll see if the president is going to address that. As you heard, the secretary said all options are on the table. So far, the only options they've publicly talked about, though, are sanctions.
All right, will be pretty crucial to hear what the president has to say in just over an hour's time. Patty, in the meantime, thanks very much indeed. Another important sphere of influence, of course, is the United Nations. And speaking at the UN within the past hour, the Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, condemned the violence in Libya.
We are closely watching developments in Bahrain, Yemen, and other countries. We view the recent events in Libya with particularly grave concern. The current situation is unpredictable and could go in any number of directions, many of them dangerous. At this critical juncture, it is imperative that the international community maintain unity and act together to ensure a prompt and peaceful transition. I want to underscore what my special advisors on the prevention of genocide and the responsibility to protect said yesterday. The reported nature and scale of the attacks on civilians are egregious violations of international humanitarian and human rights law. I condemn them loudly and without qualification, and those responsible must be held accountable in courts of law.
Let's speak to Scott Heidler from the United Nations in New York. Scott, Ban Ki-moon there putting forward the point of view of the United Nations. And also, just as we were talking with Paddy Culhane, talking about what Hillary Clinton was saying about the importance of an international effort as far as Libya is concerned, there certainly seems to be a will to do that, but there isn't any action coming out of the United Nations on that.
Exactly, Nick, and not just yet. And this statement by the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon came after he met with his senior advisors on Libya earlier today. And what it really outlines, and he said, yes, things need to be ratcheted up a little bit, but it's not up to him, it's not up to the United Nations as to what actually has to be done. That is up to the Security Council, and as he said, you know, the international community needs to speak with one voice, and many of those voices out there in the international community have focused on the Security Council, and that's where that should come through. As far as what could possibly come out of that, over the last couple of hours, we've heard more, particularly from the United States camp, particularly the mission to the United Nations. They didn't get into specifics, but they said they're talking to the United Nations and to the Security Council about further steps. We heard earlier from the White House spokesman, as Paddy Culhane pointed out, that sanctions were brought up. So it looks like we might be getting closer to the possibility of something else going on in the Security Council after that press statement was issued yesterday condemning what was going on in Libya. So maybe we're leaning toward something else in the Security Council. But as we've been saying all day and been reporting all day, that the Security Council does not act quickly. It's a body of 15 nations that have very different points of view. So getting something put through outside a 5-paragraph press statement is going to be quite the challenge, even if the intent to do so is by the majority of those on the Security Council.
Right. You'd think that time is of the essence here in this situation in Libya. How long do you think it would take if there was a will to put forward a resolution, for instance, for a no-fly zone over Libya? How long do you think that would